Remember the days when the air was clean and the streams were clear and the entire family sat in front of the radio for hours on end? Well, between now and 5 a.m., WHAM returns you to the golden days of silent radio and presents Harry Abraham in the best of all possible worlds.
Gable, you're on.
Oh, okay, thank you. Oh, all right. Yeah, thank you very much for that. My pleasure to be here. Talk about one of my, not favorite subjects, but one I've kind of been studying over the years, and that's the history of WHAM. So tonight, we're actually going to start around 1919, which is a few years before the recognized start of broadcasting. But 1919 was actually 18 years past the time that the public in general recognized something called wireless communications. And that started rethink as historians in 1901. And that's when Guglielmo Marconi sat a little shack in the cold up in Nova Scotia with some headphones on. Actually, he didn't have headphones. He didn't even have enough money to buy headphones. He had a telephone handset he had to hold up to his ear. And he's sitting there listening for one thing. And he's listening and listening, and at a point in time, he heard click, click, click. Oh, was that it? And then he heard click, click, click. And that was the letter S in 1901 being transmitted from Pole, New England to Nova Scotia. And people really sat up and took notice. What do you mean this wireless telegraphy can go over the ocean? And yeah. And he proved it several times because most people didn't believe him the first time. But that was a start. But the point there, at that time, it was just click, click, click. It was Morse code. It was no voice. So the first 18 years, if you will, the transmitters that we used were sent to use wireless telegraphy, messages, information, and what have you. But nothing to the home, nothing to the individual. Because quite frankly, we didn't know how to do that very well. There were some stations in 1903, Fessenden up in Canada, 1906, a gentleman in California was experimenting with radio phone. But it was just pitifully sad and didn't work very well. But in 1919, we actually had a pretty good experimenter right here in Rochester, New York. His name was Lawrence Hixson. He lived in Irondequoit, and he built his own apparatus, and he started broadcasting from Irondequoit. His problem was he had nobody to listen. I mean, let's face it, the start of the broadcast was a real challenge. I mean, why would you start broadcasting? There were no listeners. Why would you listen? There was nothing to listen to. So it was a really tough start in the beginning. But Lawrence Hixson, Larry, we'll see his name come up now and again. So we give credit to the first radio broadcast to KDKA, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, November 2nd, 1920. Even though there were people before him, before KDKA, they had typically no license. They had no regular listeners. The only people listening were experimenters and radio hands and what have you. But this was the first station that broadcast directly to the public with a sponsor and with information. They had news and music starting November 2nd, 1920. So that's what we call the first part of broadcasting. Nothing in the Rochester area yet except for Hixson experimenting a little bit.
Was there anything done in World War I with the Morse code?
Oh, wow. Yeah, the question was there anything done in World War I with Morse code? Yes, the military used it a lot. Yeah. But just a little heads up, in our museum, in the military section, we have the first apparatus ever used by the military. You might find that interesting. So let's move into Rochester now, and we'll talk about some of the players. Larry Hixson, he's a radio geek from Irondequoit. Frank Dinette, big player in the start of broadcasting in Rochester. He was a newspaper publisher, Democrat Chronicle, Rochester Times-Union. William Butler, who was the editor of the Times-Union. And a chap they brought in from Detroit, Michael, he helped the Detroit station get on the air and kind of work. So he had some background. So they brought him up in for a little consultation. So on February 15, 1922, Frank Dinette, publisher of the papers, wrote a big article, Times-Union to operate a big radio station. Stand by. So that was the announcement. And let's see what they had to do here to make all that happen. The Times-Union applies for a license. Okay, that was pretty easy to do. Hixson and Michael, the two radio geeks, they started installing the first radio transmitter on top of the Times-Union building in downtown Rochester. Number one problem. They used a 100-watt DeForest transmitter. Number two problem. DeForest transmitters, we later learned, were not very good. In February 28th, the very first license was issued. Was it WHAM? No. So leave here tonight with that mystery solved. WHAM was not the first licensed broadcaster in Rochester. It was indeed WHQ, who happened to be the 26th licensed broadcaster in the nation. 833 kilohertz on your radio dial. In the first operation, March 1st, 1922, we know that Ray Fagan and his orchestra played several selections of the music, opera, classical, etc. So there it was, March 1st, 1922, WHQ on the air for 87 days. And then, as we say in the market, the station went dark. And they had a problem. Downtown location was not good. The transmitter, 100 watts, was not good. But the biggest thing that gave WHQ a problem is they had no local programming. There's only so much you can do. They're newspaper publishers, after all. There's only so many hours during the day that you can sit down and read a newspaper, which is essentially what their programming was. So that was a problem. So WHQ, give them credit, number one, 87 days. So where did WHAM came from? Well, Dinette, he kind of liked to hedge his bets. So he had his guy over at Times-Union say, hey, you apply for a license. And then went over to the Democrat Chronicle and said, hey, you apply for a license, and we'll see what happens. So he did that. Frank Dinette, publisher, Alan Ross with the Democrat Chronicle, and then two guys you kind of never heard of. George Eastman, he was an industrialist that later on we kind of heard that he did good. And then there was Rush Reeves, who was with the University of Rochester, who was also very busy in an up-and-coming university. So in the beginning, what we had was the Times-Union applied for the license. DNC did the same thing, but the Democrat Chronicle license was held up. There was a problem in that when you applied for the license, you didn't get a license right away. You got a construction permit, and you had to build the license, show that the transmitter would work, and you were up and running. So they had a problem with a delay in getting their transmitter. WHQ failure was actually a good lesson for everybody. And we'll see that. What did they do? What did WHAM do? What did the Times-Union people do to make sure they didn't fail where WHQ had problems? Well, Ross and Dinette, remember those are the publishing guys, offered to give Eastman, he's the industrialist, and the Eastman School of Music their transmitter. They had finally taken delivery on their Western electric transmitter. Said, we'll give you the transmitter if you'll install it and help us out. The help was a spot, Gibb Street, where they installed the transmitter, owned by the Democratic Chronicle Times Union, and in return, we're going to install the transmitter, we're going to have the license, we're going to give you everything, but you give us programming. Remember WHQ failed, no programming. What did the Eastman School of Music have? Oh, programming coming out of the woodwork. They had all the faculty, all of the students, just wonderful, wonderful programming. The theaters and music halls and organs. So that was the big deal that they had, where WHQ did not. But George Eastman applied for the license. Remember the industrialist? He signed the papers. Part of that activity, and we're going to argue here tonight, one of our local broadcast, lifetime broadcasting right here tonight, so I have to be really careful. George Eastman liked the sound of WHAM. WHAM! 1180 news broadcast. So he selected WHAM as the call sign. Highly controversial. Because at the same time, if you looked at all the other radio broadcasters who were getting licenses about the same period, WHAK, WHAL, so it's possible that it was just a next sequence. That's what he believes. We will argue forever. But anyway, however it happened, WHAM was the license. And here we are getting it installed. That's the top of the Eastman School of Music. The antenna goes from top of here over to the chimney, and there's the feed line. You can just see it going there. It takes a real trained eye, trust me. That's the antenna feed line. Here's the Western Electric transmitter installed on the third floor of the Eastman School of Music. Ran 100 watts of high Z modulation. Let's see, so the two people in this room who understand what that is, it's a start. So here we go. I hate slides like this with just a bunch of words on it, but boy, it gets a lot of information in a hurry, so forgive me for ugly slides like this. WHAM license signed in July 6, 1922, operating frequency 833 kilohertz. Same frequency as WHQ, which leads credence to the fact that everybody thinks, well, WHAM is just WHQ, upgraded, modernized, because they're all on the same frequency, what have you. But there are only two frequencies in the entire country at the start of broadcasting. 833 kilohertz and 1050 kilohertz. So WHQ goes off the air at 8 o'clock at night on July 10th. The next morning, WHAM goes on the air. Also leading credence to the fact that, well, WHAM was just WHQ moving on. It was not. They were two definitely different organizations. Alan Ross, remember he's the geek. He was named chief operator and announcer. And for us local historians, noted that engineer Ken Gardner was hired. Ken Gardner was a personal friend of mine, wonderful guy. He stayed with them until the end. I mean, he just got tired and worn out. And this guy, Clarence Dengler, Ducky Dengler, was also a famous local radio guy that we all loved so much. December 12th, WHAM moves to 1080 kilohertz. The Federal Radio Commission finally decided, boy, 2 channels isn't enough. So they started moving stations around. So WHAM on the air now for 2 years is doing well. They're meeting their mission. Their mission is let's supply the community. We serve the community. That's why we exist. And they're doing well. They're doing news very well. They're doing market reports. They're doing school music programs. They're providing excellent material to the public. I love market reports. I've never planted a tomato in my life. But I would listen to market reports at 6 o'clock in the morning on WHAM. It was fascinating. And let me tell you how important this was in the very beginning of broadcasting. We have actual photographs of a farmer in his barn milking a cow. And when he finishes milking his cows, out in the barn, already loaded, is the produce of the day. So the wagon is loaded with tomatoes or cucumbers or whatever the produce is that he's harvesting that day. And the question is, do I drive my cart, often with a horse and wagon, all the way into the market in Rochester, only to find out, oh, we're sorry, we're not buying the peaches today. And you get in the wagon and you go all the way home. WHAM solved that problem. Time and time again. Market reports at 4, 6 o'clock in the morning. It was a huge service. That's just one example of how important the start of broadcasting was to the public. Here's WHAM control room early. The patch panels here would take audio in from the Kilbourne Hall, the theaters, the organs, and send it to the transmitter. Very important. That's a music-home speaker. Just remember I said that. It'll come up again. There will be a test. Although WHAM is successful, we're about to see some major changes here in WHAM and radio in general. Even though they're very successful, it's working well, they have good equipment, good transmitters, good antennas, they're working well enough. One of the problems that Eastman and Reese has at the school is that the amount of work it takes to run a radio station. I think initially they thought, well, we'll just wire up some microphones and we'll put them in the studio and we'll say, hey, Nancy, bring your violin and sit down and play here for a while. That would be it. It wasn't. It took a lot of work. But what happened next was start of the new beginning of broadcasting in Rochester. The WHAM owners, Times Union, Democrat and Chronicle, Dinette, decided that they wanted to concentrate on the newspaper business. Even though initially the thinking was, we're not in the publishing business. We're not in the newspaper business. We're in the communication business. So how we communicate, whether it's by a written page, a typed newspaper, or radio, that's the business we're in. It looks like at this point in time they're changing their thought on that a little bit. And they're getting back to, we're not so sure. So the owners contracted W. Roy McKay, who was president of the Stromberg Carlson telephone manufacturing company here in Rochester. Huge company. Made a lot of money and a huge good name selling telephone equipment. And then later on, they started building radios. Very high-end radios. In fact, we had some wonderful examples spread out through the museum here. Be sure to see some of those. So the thought is that they would be interested to buy WHAM. And it turns out they were. So McCain agreed to purchase WHAM for a sum of $6,000. That included all the plant, et cetera, et cetera. So The agreement was that the Eastman School of Music would continue to provide programming. So this is a big change, a big start. We're losing Dinette, and we're picking up Strawberry Carlson. And just a little bit of a side, at this time there were 6 million radio sets in the home. So 1920, there were no radio sets in the home. Okay, now 7 years later, there are 6 million sets in the home. That's how fast radio is growing. So let's see what Strawberry Carlson did. It takes money to make money. So they wasted no time improving WHAM's stature, programming, signal strength, and community service. They ordered a new 1,000 watt transmitter. And this was something that would be a hallmark of everything they've done since. They only were authorized 100 watts, but they bought a 1,000 watt transmitter, saying, we'll need it someday. New transmitter site near Victor, New York was selected to install the new transmitter and 2 big radio towers to put the antenna up between. New studios were planned and designed to be installed at the Rochester plush Sagamore Hotel and started every broadcaster in the country. And now I'm coming to you from the beautiful, wherever you were, started at the beautiful plush Sagamore Hotel. So the goal was to complete the installation in a very short time and with a pretty big budget, $200,000 in 27 was a pretty good amount of money, about $2.9 million today. So that's WHAM being pushed a little bit by Strawberry Carlson to improve everything. Here's the 225-foot towers on top of Harris Hill. The beautiful site, the wired antenna went between the two, and these didn't drop down to the transmitter building. So that was a big start, big improvement in signal strength. Here was their 1,000 watt. Oh no, I'm sorry, I had that wrong. They were authorized 1,000 watts at this time, but they bought a 5,000 watt transmitter. So this is their 5,000 watt transmitter installed at the Victor site. Motor generator was pretty common. Lots of DC voltage was hard to obtain via vacuum tubes, so they used motor generators. Motor driving a plate supply, a modulator supply, and a filament supply. And here's the control panel up on top of the hill in Victor. So the programming came in from the Sagamore Hotel via telephone lines, pretty common today. And there's the music hall. And they seem to like that. They just kept on taking that with them. At this point in time, not so much today, but at that point in time, the Federal Radio Commission, the precursor to the Federal Communications Commission, their rules were that you had to have transmitter engineers at the transmitter anytime you're on the air. So you needed people at the transmitter 24 hours a day if you were on the air 24 hours a day. So there was the setup at the top of Harris Hill. They had a nice little kitchen, and here's an electric stove, which is pretty unusual for the time, but they were trying very hard to prevent any sorts of fires up there. They're kind of afraid of that. And a 15-mile trip could be a problem sometimes, so they had facilities in case people had to stay overnight, and often they did. Here's a typical storm of 1945, and yes, that is the driveway. So you can see they had a little bit of a problem there sometimes. And even though being a transmitter engineer might seem like a pretty nice job, pretty high-class job, they have their days as well. Here's garbage day at the WHAM. You'd be surprised at some of the photographs that were kept in the archives. Meantime, off the hill down in Rochester, we're starting the the studios at the beautiful Sagamore Hotel. There's the front piece, there's the Studio A at the Sagamore, and you can see the pianos, and they would bring in instruments and play live music here. And here's the master audio at the Sagamore, where they would bring signals in from the studios and from the orchestra and what have you, and send it by phone line up to the transmitter. And there's the music hall. One of the things that people don't even think about nowadays is, what did you do if you wanted to repeat a message over and over again, such as a commercial or the announcement of a special program coming up? Well, you did that by making records. And making records is something that they did every day, almost all day. And it was quite sophisticated. Here's a record cutter. And you see this man looking at the grooves that are being cut in the record. And you could actually look and you could tell the quality of the record by how the hard rubber was coming off the master disc. It was quite the operation, actually, but done successfully, many hours every day. And when they were done, sometimes they would sing if they had kind of interesting announcements or something. And thank heaven some were kept, and we have a few here at the museum, but they're pretty interesting. And look at this one. You realize this is a record cutting machine. It's a half horsepower motor. Two of them for the drive shaft turning this thing. This is a huge hunk of concrete it's sitting on, and a big plate of steel. And look at these massive turntables, all to keep road noise and stuff out of the record. It was a big deal. Just cutting records and having them available during the day. Okay, another boring slide here. So July 27, the new 5 kilowatt transmitter installed at Victor. WHAM license is now moved over to Strasburg Carlson. Still at 50 kilohertz, using 1,000 watts and a 5,000 watt transmitter. I'm not saying anybody cheated. Signal's a little weak tonight. Nobody's looking. Up goes the power. Nobody ever did that, I'm sure. Unless they were putting it on 80 meters, hand pans in the dead of night. That I know happened. The boys used to talk about that a lot. First broadcast from the Sagamore, September 27th. And here's the kind of good indicator. The staff at WHAM increased to 16 people. It doesn't say where that is, how many were at the transmitter, how many down at the Sagamore. 16 people. And in a brilliant move, they hired William Fay as a program director. And he just went bonanza. He just went crazy, improving everything having to do with WHAM programming. November, just a little bit later, WHAM moves to 1150 kilohertz with 5,000 watts of power. And from the Federal Radio Commission, they got the third channel status. That was a big deal. That means nobody else is on that frequency. Nobody's going to interfere with you. So if you have listeners that are kind of far away and would be interfered with without this status, that was a big deal. So the third channel, nobody else is on that frequency. That really started a lot of improvement. WHAM was also the first station ever outside of the National Broadcasting NBC studios to originate a nationwide broadcast. In other words, when you joined a network like the NBC, usually programming came into your station and you would play that to the local listening. In this case, they generated programming that was so good, the network said, "Oh, boy, you send that to us, and we will send it to the network, and it will be heard all over the country. And so that's the first time that was done. First time a member of the NBC group ever sent a nationwide broadcast into the network. Bill Fay was named general manager. Again, a good move. And here we are. Remember him? Frank Dinette? Just a little bit on the side here. Frank Dinette finally got his radio station. He bought WHEC radio here in Rochester, and he got his radio station. Oh, but wait, it gets better. WHEC in Rochester is Hixson Electric Company. So remember him? He was the geek in the Rondequoit. He finally did good. He finally got his radio station built. And finally he sold it to Frank Dinette. And there's his call sign, WHEC. Which would make one think that you could apply for a license.
In 3132, you could. Or previous to that. An interesting point about Frank Dinette, I just finished the company history. Frank Dinette hated broadcasting, like most newspapermen.
Yeah.
He loved the profits.
He loved the money. Yeah, money was a big driver in radio. Thank you. So, WHAM played to the big dogs. So McCain and Fay worked for many years to convince the Federal Radio Commission to increase their power to 25,000 watts. And the way they did that, they cited outstanding service to the community, outstanding programming, and ever-increasing number of hours of operation. The FRC agreed, and they said, okay, here's your construction permit, go ahead and build your 25,000 watt station. So what did WHAM do? They went out and bought a 50,000 watt transmitter, of course. And there they are. That's what it takes to install the 50,000 watt transmitter. A lot of people. And there it is, all finished. I had the pleasure of visiting this site not too many years ago. And it's kind of interesting. Nothing's left, of course. But this cement foundation here, that's still there. It was too big to take out. And that is still there. But everything from here to here, it's just all gone. And it's the current machinery of the company that's up there now. But there's precious little left inside the building to hint that it was ever anything going on in there radio-wise. Here's the 25 kilowatt from the 50 kilowatt transmitter, part of the operating apparatus. And new is this gadget right here. That's a crystal-controlled oscillator, which puts you exactly on frequency, something that was a little bit of a problem before, but now they're crystal-controlled and have a really, really nice transmitter. WHAM always loves to promote themselves. So here they are with another souvenir program, and on March 4, 1933, 25 kilowatt boost. They had a special concert that evening, and away they went. Just a little while later, the newspaper says WHAM granted 50,000 watts, ranks against the most powerful. So WHAM, they knew. They were ready. All they had to do was flip the switch, and they were running 50 kilowatts. And then some interesting things happened. Look at this guy, this kid living on Harris Hill, just below the hill. He opened up his furnace, and he's hearing WHAM coming out of the furnace. That made a lot of press, including Ripley, believe it or not. And we understand how they can happen, dissimilar metals and rust and things. It causes detection, but still, you open your furnace and out comes music. That has to be something. Where's David? David, tell us your story about WHAM going to 50 kilowatts.
Yeah, my father's parents bought a seasonal residence, which I looked on a USGS survey, was in the town of Victor, about 10,000 feet away from this transmitter, just a little less than 2 miles as the crow flies. And it was northwest of the transmitter, and assuming that the transmitter was favoring sending a signal to Rochester, they were right in the path. My father, being an older teenager and an experimenter, was given the loft in one of the outbuildings of this seasonal residence to use as his little workshop. So he put up a 50-foot antenna connected to ground to a cold water pipe that went to the well, and hooked these up to a Fillmore crystal set. He took the output from the crystal set, put it into an Atwater Kent horn speaker, and he was able to tune in WHAM at room volume. And so he thought, this is great. No AC feeding it, no batteries, no tubes, and I'm filling the room with a broadcaster. So he just decided he'd let it going 24/7 up in this loft. And he did until my grandparents made him turn it off because the handyman they had who used the lower part of the building was starting to get really annoyed by hearing this radio blasting all the time. So that's my family story with WHAM's transmitter.
Thank you, Dave. And as most of us know, we have a little crystal set. Well, just barely drive headphones on a good day, but to drive a speaker, fill a room with music is quite unusual. I bet that was pretty exciting for your dad. Well, we got these twin towers, these twin 250-foot towers at Victor, and they're working pretty good, but the broadcast technology is changing. And they don't like flat top antennas quite as much as they used to. So the engineers decide that we're going to put up a single vertical radiator, 450 feet high, and we're going to take down the old 250 footers. So here they are with a kind of a groundbreaking ceremony. And here's the start of the 450 footer. And that's a piece of concrete 16 feet square. I remember I told you I visited the transmitter site. Well, that piece of concrete is still there. What would you expect? What do you do with a 16 square foot piece of cement? Self-supporting, no guy wears. So here it is going up. And of course, when they're building the new transmitter, the old ones have to stay on the air. So don't touch anything. And there it is. It's all finished. It's a radio piece of art. It's just a beautiful thing. So for those of us into radio, I could sit down and have a picnic and sit in a chair with a hot dog and just look at that. People might think, well, he's a little, but it really is. It's a radio art. And there's kind of another weird photo in the archives. Picture being taken down from the tower. Some employees, I don't know whether they're having a transmitter day or something. This is not a swimming pool. And they didn't treat their employees quite that well. When you reach the 50,000 watt power level, your transmitter tubes got kind of big and they got really hot. So they had to cool them off with water. So the water, this is a cooling pond that cooled the water, went back inside, cooled the tubes, water went back. So that's a cooling pond for the transmitter. And the old gives way to the new. Here's the new one. And here's one of the towers laying on the ground already. I don't know. I don't think they had explosives those days. They probably had a cutting torch and try to have it go that way. And here's the, as they say, WHAM love their documentation. Here they put it on the front of a trolley announcing that the new radiator is in use. January 23, 1939. A little change of pace here. And what does it take to operate a successful radio station? One of the things that it takes desperately is feedback from your listeners. What do you like? What don't you like? Where are you? How do you hear us? Et cetera, et cetera. So this is a very interesting find in the archives. It's probably a report to board of directors or somebody. But it's the statistics, statistics on mail received 2 weeks, March 7 to March 21, 1938. 2 week period. 12,700 pieces of mail. Can you imagine the effort just to open that? And then a lot of data about that. Number of letters from Rochester, 2,300. Number of states, 21. Number of provinces, 1. Number of towns in New York, 6. Anyways, they just had all of this data. So one of the reasons why you would write for a radio station is because of the hobby involved. If there was something called a shortwave listener, a broadcast listener, and these are hobbyists who would listen to their radio equipment, usually late at night, and to try to log as many different radio stations as they could hear. And distance, DX was always a big part of that. Boy, I heard Chicago. Well, that's a big deal. Well, look at this letter. Oh, and when you wrote letters like that, of course, the station gleaned information from that. But and then they would return often is these things called QSL cards. So as a shortwave listener, broadcast listener, this is what you collected. You really collected those QSL cards. You really loved to have those. I still have a wall full of them. And some of them belong to a program called Echo Stamps, and they set up these stamps as well. But look at this letter from Andrew Vincent in Los Angeles, California. One of the things that you did was prove that you heard the station by telling what the programming was. So here he says the closing selection on this broadcast was Happy Days. And the program was fine, but this is a biggie. This is a biggie. WHAM came in as clear and as loud as KFI here in Los Angeles. So KFI was a big station. Still are. And WHAM and KFI are the same signal strength in Los Angeles, California. So the engineers at the station probably went, yeah, good deal. But what really happened is you didn't get paid for that. You didn't earn any money for that. You earned money by how well you put your advertising in the ears of your listeners. And the truth of the matter was, that could cause you problems. So we'll look at that here in a bit. Moving day again, last move. Third channel, 1180, March 29, 1941. So they finally got their 1180 status, and more than that, they got more than a clear channel from the Federal Communications Commission. It was by treaty of countries in the Western Hemisphere. So it was Canada, U.S., Cuba, used to be a real country with a real government. Cuba, Dominican Republic, all of these people agreed that WHAM in Rochester, New York was such a significant radio station that they deserved a clear channel, not just in the U.S., but in all of the Western Hemisphere. And this was a country treaty, not just a FCC thing. So from this point on, WHAM, by treaty, is a clear channel station. And everybody follows that except for one country violated it. The United States of America. And we might talk about that. Okay, moving on. One of the things that happened is you like to get your station out. You like to get out in the public and broadcast different events. So that's called going remote. Here's their remote broadcast truck, if you will. And here are the antennas kind of folded up. And here they are when they're up and ready to operate. Those of you who are radio people, you'll love this 4-wire antenna here. And where do you get power for your mobile transmitter? You pull a rope and you start an engine just like your old lawnmower. So here's the operator pulling on the rope and starting his generator to get his transmitter on the air. So they actually went on the air. They would transmit from the remote site to the Sagamore Hotel in this case, and they would detect that and put it out on the transmitter. Here's a little modern remote, and inside they have a little studio where they can talk to people, interview people, and of course the ever important local guy running the board, and here you have all the commercials and what have you. And so remote was a big part of it. And WHAM, of course, they had the Phyllis 2. They had a yacht. The Phyllis 2 would make you think that maybe there was a Phyllis 1. But there were probably some real parties on that. Moving along here, WHAM innovates again with FM. Not the first, but early to FM. December 1939, they went on the air with a frequency of 51 megahertz, which isn't even a band today, and started serving the public. The first call sign was WHXBB, W, a station east of the Mississippi. 8 is the district, New York. X means experimental. So that was an experimental station that went on for several years, continuing 51R. All of the frequencies started with a 4, so you drop the 4. All of the frequency had a decimal point, so you drop the decimal point. So the frequency became simply 51. So W51R for Rochester. And that's how they tried to license all of the early FM stations. It got a problem. Like, for example, maybe there's more than one station in New York beginning with R. I'm pretty sure there is. So later on, W51R becomes WHFM. That didn't happen by accident. Thank you. So they had to apply for that. Here's the first transmitter. It's a 3,000 watt REL transmitter on 45.1 megahertz. Ken Gardner he was the original engineer in 1922. He's still going at it. The site is the RG&E building in downtown Rochester. And that too is in the museum. Along that time, World War II era, WHFM played kind of an interesting role in helping the war effort here in Rochester as far as manufacturing goes. And they were contracted to send special music to the manufacturing companies in Rochester. And the music was Kind of slow but enjoyable. No jazz. Didn't get you up dancing in the aisleway or anything. But they did that for many years, sent special broadcasts to the manufacturing wartime effort. 1945, they changed the frequency from 45 to 98 megahertz. And it took a little hardware to do that. Ken Gardner, he really liked to get his picture taken, I think. And this just blew my mind. Thank heavens it says save on it. Because boy, is this worth saving. This is 1953. This is the WHAM engineers working on a little program before the word stereo was even invented. Nobody knew what stereo was, but by gosh, the WHAM engineers were going to transmit stereo. And the way they did that is they set up all the music source, and they had one microphone, which was the right channel, and that went to the FM transmitter. They had another microphone that went to the AM transmitter, which was the left channel. And ahead of time, they just sent information out, as well as they could, and it said, okay, all you people, put your FM transmitter receiver on the right side of your living room, and put the AM receiver on the left side of your living room, and at 8 o'clock, we're going to knock your socks out. And they did. They sent stereo in 1953. And I knew this guy, Gale Heinzman. He was a good friend of mine. He never talked about this. But this was, record-breaking stuff, and he never talked about it. Another thing they did, which is kind of interesting for you techie people in here, you had to ride the game. It's funny. So here are two audio controls, and here's the gain, and as you turn up the AM gain, these chains would turn up the FM gain, and here's the alpha. It's kind of cruel. So that was the early foray into FM and stereo. And now, here we are, 1945, December, the war's over, things are starting to look good. Bill Fay, once again, they're breaking ground on a brand new radio city here in Rochester. And there it is on Humboldt Street, shortly after its construction. The building is still there. It doesn't have WHAM on in front of it anymore, but there's Radio City Music Hall, the Rochester WHAM version. Pretty big deal. And what's kind of interesting is, look at this, projected television studio. So they're kind of thinking ahead. Nobody's even thought about TV yet, except the designers of Rochester radio. Pretty special building, 7 layers of sound insulation in the walls. And the main problem was the New York Central Railroad kind of went pretty close in the back of the building. So they were really working hard to keep vibration from the railroad out of the building. And there are no straight walls. Anybody been in here? It's cool.
I worked there for 10 years.
Oh, how nice! How nice!
Yeah, it's Channel 8 now.
Yeah.
Yeah, going. Yes. There's not a straight wall in the whole place. Yeah, for echo reduction and what have you. So it's pretty magnificent building. Can you read this? Remember, this is WHAM, so they're going to celebrate. So here's a dinner to celebrate the opening of the Radio City. And then what did we have? We had filet mignon or lobster Newburg. Pretty good. They did mess around. Remember the letter from the guy in Los Angeles? boy, did he get it right. He woke up a lot of people's mind. I'm not sure it's that letter, but they were aware of the fact that they had a huge signal outside of the normal desired broadcasting area for WHAM. Where you want your big signal is where your advertising is, and you're going to sell more product. It's all about selling product. And the problem was, even though this was a far better antenna than the flat top, a single vertical radiator on a high hill typically had propagation that did wonderful things for your TX. So you could put a big signal into Los Angeles. Believe it or not, you had not a very good signal into Brighton. And boy, you wanted to serve Brighton. You really did. So the broadcast industry has changed their mind. It says, we don't want tall verticals on a hill. We want ground-fed verticals on a swamp. Guess where all the broadcast stations are in Rochester, except for WHAM at that time. They're in the swamps of Brighton. Oh, I'm sorry. Right. But let's face it, you got a lot of swampy areas there. So you go to 495, 90, all those intersections, just sort of stand there where everybody's going this way and turn around. And you see lights flashing all over the place. All of the broadcast stations are there, except WHAM. The WHAM means a swamp, not a hill. So enter Brookdale Road in Scottsville, and here we are, 1947. They're starting to build a new transmitter site and a new tower. 456 tower with a center guide point, a single guide point, kind of unusual. And it's ground mounted, fed at the base, which means it has to be insulated from ground. All the others are just put in cement. So look at this thing of beauty. This entire tower sits on a piece of porcelain that big. It sits on a coffee cup, essentially. Pretty strong coffee cup, but nonetheless, it's insulated from ground. And here's the new tower at Scottsville. And of course, the goal was to get a nice, moist, wet ground that would help propagate the radio signal, etc. And they achieved it. Here's the next day. You got moist ground? Yes. You might remember that? It's just after the war. This is the Genesee River. Imagine that. The Genesee River came up across Scottsville Road. It came a mile away. Actually, it was kind of really saturated earth from rain.
Top Morris Dam.
That's before the dam. It was indeed. And they also got a new 15,000 watt Westinghouse transmitter. Big beauty. Air-cooled tube, no more water. If anybody has any influence at WHAM, tell them the museum would love to have one of these tubes. So the next time one goes bad, save it. Except these tubes, of course, you don't throw them away. They send them back to the manufacturer and they rebuild the tubes. So I will probably never see one. A lot of these, later in the 50s, a lot of things are happening in broadcasting. It's not the Bill Fay, who's the local news director anymore, or programming director. It's often somebody sitting in an office in Chicago who's dictating what kind of program you have, what kind of music you're playing, and what have you. So WHAM starts getting moved around. A mile from my WHAM. And things start changing. There's no stronger Carlson. It's big conglomerate stations, so much that the FCC had to put their foot down and say, hey, you can only own so many radio stations. So here in Rochester, things are changing a lot. Ownership is moving about, programming is moving about as they try to find where they are with AM and FM and what have you. Several local broadcasters kind of took it on their own, and they literally changed the programming between FM and AM. FM didn't have to be stodgy classical music 24 hours a day. They started making it really interesting program. We had smell-o-vision on WHAM. Different gimmicks to get people to listen. But it's changing quite a bit. The Hell, of course, went away. It's now a very busy factory making local goods, so that was a good thing. We moved out of the Sagamore Hotel and into Midtown Plaza. And it's interesting enough, one of the people that did that was this gentleman right here. A man by the name of Jack Pelvino. Jack Pelvino probably had one of the biggest things to do with the changes of how we as listeners listen to radio and how the broadcasters provided that radio in the local network. So at this point in time, I'd like to, as we're closing here, I would really, if you're interested, you may have noticed that as a bunch of techies here, the discussion this evening involved a lot of technical things on transmitters, antennas, and the things that we love so much. But precious little on the people behind the microphone and what have you. Jack Pelvino, by the way, who was so into, let's improve our programming. Let's not have a guy in Chicago dictate what we're going to play on the air and what have you. Jack Pelvino bought WHAM. He had a few helpers. You don't earn that much playing records on a radio station. But anyway, this book just tells that story so beautifully. It's on the air by Jack Pelvino. And you get it at 8 books, and we don't have this in our library, do we? I think we should. Anyways, that's the...
Just turn around for a couple of minutes and we will.
So what's this all about? TV Days, June 11th. Buy your set now. This is WHAM Radio, 1180, 50,000 watts, telling people to buy a TV set. Why would they do that? Well, they're about to become WHAM TV, channel 5. 5 or 6? 5.
6. I thought it started with 6.
6.
Okay, we have an argument. It's 5, 6, or 7. There you go.
It was 6 originally, then it moved.
Then it moved to 5, and then 8.
That's right.
6, 5.
There you go. Okay, very good. So this is a sign up on Harris Hill, right by 98 and whatever the intersection used to be. Stand by. Wow, WHAM TV. Stand by for volume 2. Because there might someday be talking about TV here. Who knows? Thank you for coming.